If you've ever feared not being considered the real parent, if you're unsure how you can coexist in your child's heart along with their birth mother or birth father, if you're curious about how an adoptee tries to earn their love from their adoptive parents, this episode will speak to you. Sara Easterly, adoptee, mother, and writer, takes us into the secret fears and desires of an adopted child, and she does so with gentleness and grace. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of The Long View. This is a podcast brought to you by the people at adopting.com. I'm your host, Lori Holden, author of The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption and longtime blogger at lavenderluz.com. I'm a mom through domestic infant adoption to a daughter and a son now in their late teens. And let me tell you, it's been a ride. Think of any road trip you've taken. There are ups and there are downs, and it's always an adventure. You're always glad for the trip, and afterwards you might on occasion end up thinking, if I knew then what I know now. Regarding your adoptive parenting journey, we aim to help you know now. Our guest today is Sara Easterly. I'm so excited to have Sara here. She came on my radar earlier this year and I got to meet her at a book signing. We are going to talk today about the one thing that can grip the heart of an adoptive parent with a fist full of fear. This is the concept of real, as in coming from another soccer mom. Oh, he's adopted? Does he know who his real parents are? And also incoming from your beloved child. You're not my real mom, which cuts even deeper. So Sara Easterly is an adult adoptee. She's the author of the award-winning Searching for Mom, a memoir. It won the gold medal of the Illumination Book Awards. I believe she's won 2 subsequent awards, including one just recently. Sara's essays and articles have been published by Dear Adoption, Psychology Today, Feminine Collective, Her View from Home, Godspace, the Neufeld Institute, and the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Sara is on staff with the Neufeld Institute, which studies attachment and child development. Sara is also a mom with 2 tenacious daughters and the daughter of 2 amazing moms, both her adoptive mom and her birth mother. Sara enjoys supporting mothers in their journeys and has a passion for helping the non-adopted better understand the hearts of adopted children. Sara, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, so happy to have you. Tell us briefly your story of becoming an adoptee, the parts that you're able to share.
Sure. Well, I was adopted when I was 2 days old, and I was born in Billings, Montana. My adoptive family had connections there. My aunt and uncle lived there. It was a domestic, obviously private adoption that took place in the 1970s. I'd been always told that it was a gray market adoption. I never really knew what that meant, other than I knew my story that I was brought to my aunt and uncle's house in the middle of the night where my mom and dad were waiting for me. I did love that story. It just sounded so kind of exotic and exciting. And I guess I've always been a writer at heart. And so stories like that were always kind of fun and captured my imagination. And that was most of all I knew about my story. Up until my reunion, I had been told that my parents were 15, and it turns out that wasn't the case, but that is kind of where my mind had been. They were a little bit older. My birth mother was about to turn 18. But then now that I'm in reunion and in an open relationship with my birth mother, there's more to the story. The OB who delivered me was kind of known as the go-to guy for what I'm putting in air quotes that you can't see as the unwed birth mothers at the time. And my birth mother had had a change of heart. She'd wanted to keep me, but he shamed her and kind of put an end to that, which, was fairly common in that era. And I think that's what the gray market was all about. It was, probably a little bit crossing that line of ethics, but it was also perfectly legal at the time. And I'm sure that the OB and just society in general looked really frowned upon situations at that time like that of unplanned pregnancies and single mothers, and really believed that they were doing the best thing. So it worked out for my parents, and I had a wonderful, what I would call a normal middle class upbringing. and grew up in Colorado and had two very loving parents, for sure. So what I have come to see is they, would have been very, it's a very kind of sad, bittersweet story with my birth mother, but I landed in a really wonderful home too. So.
I have to tell you, when I got to that part of your book and I put myself in the place of your birth mom and realized how disempowered women were in that time period, and all that shame, and it just made me so sad for the both of you, and for your mom. Like, there's no win out of all of that.
No, it's true. It's yeah, it's sad. It's sad all the way around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's there's also joys all around too. And joys to be back in reunion and to now have a relationship after all those years. I feel, I love saying that I do have two wonderful moms now. I mean, it's wow, that's amazing.
I like how you redirected that adoption is so complex. It can be two opposite things at the same time. It can be sad and it can be joyous. And I think sometimes we don't really get that when we're until we live it.
Yes.
When I overhear adult adoptees talking in their spaces that they've let adoptive parents into, and when I read memoirs of adult adoptees, which I highly suggest that adoptive parents do a lot of listening. But one thing I keep hearing about is this phrase, coming out of the fog. What do adoptees mean when they say coming out of the fog? And what was it like for you to come out of the fog?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I I would say no matter kind of what we were just alluding to, no matter what the noble, tender, and loving or necessary circumstances are related to adoption, when there is a bond between a mother and the infant in utero, scientifically that creates something significant. And so there is fallout when that bond is disrupted. And we don't always want to look at that in the adoption space. It can be painful to look at that, and it can be painful for adoptees to look at that. I see it as being able to hold, coming out of the fog for me. I often explain it as it's being able to hold the both and when it comes to adoption, not the either or.
Mm.
And anyone can be in the fog, not just adoptees, but I think it's particularly hard for adoptees to look honestly at it. When we're children, one, we have so much emotion, and it's just too much emotion for consciousness, for starters. And in many cases, a lot of cases, it's pre-verbal experience. So how do you have words for something that these feelings that are felt before you learn words? Our grief tends to be largely unrecognized, and I know, having lost, my story through having read the book, but having lost my mother, when your mother dies, people rally around you with support and sympathy, and they're there to listen. Your good friends are there to listen. People bring you casseroles. But when we lose our first mothers through the process of adoption, nobody's bringing casseroles, and it would be weird, that's just not happen. But that doesn't mean that grief isn't there, and it can be confusing if there's no outlet for the grief. And just how do you make sense of that? And all alone. So it's hard, and it's just something that you can just kind of keep stuffing to the background. The third thing I would say about it is that many of us as adoptees become like incredible people pleasers, which I know is kind of an existential that a lot of them go to. But I think after we've lost our first mothers, we can work so hard unconsciously. We don't know we're doing this. This has taken an adult perspective to go back and fill it in, but we work so hard to keep our next mothers close. We want to take on their beliefs, or what we perceive to be their beliefs, even if they're not pouring the beliefs in what we think those beliefs should be. We assume, because we want to keep our parents close. We've got to. It's, our brain is doing that for a reason, for survival.
And I want to ask you more about the good adoptee, but before we get off of coming out of the fog, I wanted to ask you if developmentally, is there a time when that processing starts to happen? Does it happen for everyone? Is there something that triggers it? Is it an innate curiosity for people who do come out of the fog and some who don't come out of a fog? What do you know about that?
Well, I developmentally, I was slow at it, so I'm probably not the spokesperson. I mean, when I see adoptees in their 20s who are much further along, I'm like, oh my gosh, that took me till 40. So, I think as adoptees, you can kind of anticipate an extended adolescence with us. And when that adolescence is going to end, it depends on so many factors and how deep those wounds are and how repressed they are and how much room and space there was given for them to unfold. Many adoptees will say, and obviously not all adoptees choose parenthood, but many of those who do will say that becoming a parent starts to pull them out of the fog. And that's for sure what happened for me. That was definitely becoming a mother. And I waited until later in life to become a mother. So that, maybe had I done that sooner, then I might have come out of the fog a little bit sooner. But it was for sure becoming a mother that.
And is that because of the biological ties that you have with this human being and seeing somebody who looks more like you and all of that?
Yeah, exactly. I think, there were three things. I think that was for sure the first one, is just this first time, this inaugural window, seeing my genes and studying the first traces of my very first blood relative, and just, really pondering genes and who we're related to, where our different traits come from, how we're connected to our family members. I had a lot of frustration around that because my daughter, everywhere we went, people were saying she looked like my husband. And that frustration just kept building because I didn't realize at the time why it was so frustrating, but I needed her to look like me. I needed to see some genetic mirroring in my family member. The second thing I would say about how motherhood for me started to pull me out of the fog was that it forced me to question a long-held belief that I had that I didn't like babies. I was very reticent about becoming a mother. Just kind of, we didn't talk about it and it just sort of happened. And I think looking back now, that's because I just had such weird mixed feelings about babies. When coworkers would bring them into the office, I'd kind of just have interest, oh yeah, cute, and I just wasn't interested. But I think that all went back to myself as a baby. And I didn't want to face the fact that babies were precious. I think there was a story I had told myself that I wasn't precious enough to keep. And so babies in general, it was easier just to kind of say, oh, babies aren't anything special, than to actually realize I was one of those too, and I was special as well. So that, and then you can't hold your own baby in your arms and deny that that's a precious being and a miracle and something so outstanding. So it just kind of started to shift that story. I'd that false story I had about myself.
Mm.
And then there were other flawed beliefs that got questioned and challenged as well. And some of them just the nature of adoption too. But, one, I think, just I went into parenting deciding, okay, my kids are never going to have any wounds, which, I had wounds. So I wanted to make sure my kids weren't going to suffer. And I think, a lot of us go into parenting that way. I started doing it. I did attachment parenting via baby wearing, and I was kind of looking at it almost as a checklist or a job that I was trying to master. And then just kind of kept learning some lessons. My youngest daughter would just pull my chin and kind of want to look deep into my eyes. And here I'm thinking I'm doing it all right, and yet I'm missing something really significant, and that is connection. And I think I had this false belief because of the nature of adoption that mothers are replaceable. That's a little bit of the, it's not an intended message of adoption. Nobody ever just wants to outright say that, but that was a message I had that carried over into myself as a parent. But I kind of realized, no, mothers aren't replaceable like that. Obviously, I still thought and wondered a lot about my birth mother, and that didn't negate the fact that I had a wonderful mother, my adoptive mother, but they weren't
It's the both
replaceable.
and again, right?
Interchangeable. Exactly. And it really started to teach me too that loving deeply is really challenging for adoptees. We're afraid the rug's going to be pulled out from underneath us. Our brain has learned that and responded accordingly just to protect us. And so it is a default especially in our closest relationships. And, it's heartbreaking that it also extends to our children, but, it's just that fear of intimacy. And it takes a lot of work for me. It's continual work for me to unlearn those flawed beliefs that I just took on. No one taught me these things. It just is what my brain did.
So for you, the fog clearing made you question some of the really tightly held beliefs you had that you didn't even know were beliefs, like you weren't worthy at the beginning, that mothers are replaceable, and that everything could change like that. Is that kind of what coming out of the fog can be?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what it was for me.
And so it makes sense then that you don't want that second mom to disappear too. So you have to be really good. You have to be worthy. You have to be good. So let's talk about, and you do this in your book, what a good adoptee does. What can we equate being a good adoptee with being a healthy person?
Well, yeah, that word good is so charged. It's tricky. And that comes from Betty Jean Lifton. That's a phrase she termed. And when I learned it, I thought, oh, that's it. That she knows. She knew what she was talking about. For me, it was always trying to measure up, trying to stand out, to be good for my parents, to be good for my teachers, wanting to be better and best, and working to win love, proving my loyalty and devotion, saying the things I thought my mom wanted to hear. So from the outside, when anybody's doing that, it's hard to look at that as unhealthy, because it's who doesn't love a well-behaved child? I mean, I think my children are not adopted, but I think all the time, gosh, I wish they were robots. Like, it would be so much easier,
I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, it would, and society needs and thrives on this too. I mean, that's how our society, it works when we're all being good. It serves everybody. So it's not to say that we want to groom, I'm putting in air quotes, bad. I don't think there's any bad children, but it's not that we want to groom bad children. But I think just knowing the dynamic there's a huge temptation for adoptees to do that. It's not healthy for our kids feeling like they have to work for our love. That's not ultimately healthy. I think for me, nobody's good all the time. And so I had parts of myself that I had to hide from my mom. I felt like I had to hide those things. Because there's more to me than the good adoptee. And I wanted her approval so bad, I had to hide anything that didn't add up to what I felt was what my mom needed. And, it also feeds insecurity. If, my mom loved the curated me, that almost tells me she wouldn't love the rest of me, the whole me. And so then it's not an authentic relationship, because it's only based on part of the story. So again, that's just not healthy.
This kind of ties back to the both and concept as well. You wanted to be loved for all of you, the air quote good and the air quote bad. And to be authentic, you needed to know that you didn't have to be worthy of love, but you had those deeper beliefs about, and I think, I mean, I'm not adopted, but I remember having those too. Sense worthiness is probably a developmental thing that a lot of people go through. So you have written about kind of pushing the boundary with your mom on this one point, where you kind of left being the good adoptee, and you yelled at her when you were a teenager. You yelled at her in anger and you said, I'm going to go find my real mom. So can you explain for us what that explanation was and what it wasn't?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, my poor mom. Like, and I'm bracing myself. My kids are on the verge here of adolescence, and I'm like, oh gosh. I mean, I remember at one point my mom saying, "Someday I hope you have two teenagers just like you, and two teenage daughters." And I wish yeah, I'm sure she's laughing. But yeah, that is real mom is something that's so complicated, and I think any teenager, there's a few aspects to this that I want to speak to. I think, most teenagers, we got to find out what those pain points are for our parents. It's just part of our process, and get there. We got to cut to the quick sometimes. And for me, I'd learned that telling my mom that I was going to leave and go find my real mother were words that had a lot of power. And she reacted with hurt feelings, and so the words were in fact powerful. That didn't feel good after the fact. These are things, when you've got this brain that's going primal and developing in adolescence, you don't think through very carefully. It didn't feel good after the fact. And I wasn't always using those words as a weapon. I didn't, deep down, I never really, I say that now kind of as an adult. I wasn't intending to hurt her. I didn't want those words to be a weapon. But at the same time, when I say I wasn't intending, they were coming without conscious thought. It was coming from an unspoken place of longing, and since infancy, for my birth mother, and feeling the pain over the very real feelings of relinquishment. So I I think what's hard about that, that I've seen, is that it's really hard to not take that personally when you're an adoptive parent. I think it can kind of gnaw the confidence of, and for my mom, it was upsetting. She packed my lunches every day. She showed up at all my meets. She was there engaging with my teachers and working in the classroom, doing always the room mother, the room parent, and standing by me through struggles with friends and boyfriends, which of course there were a lot of that kind of adolescent kind of drama and stuff. And so those things were absolutely true. My adoptive mom was amazing and just as real. But I think a lot of the real mother goes back to the unrecognized and hidden grief that adoptees have when it's not acknowledged. That grief that I kind of spoke to earlier, and the first mother are kind of treated as if they don't matter. Then I think a lot of adoptees feel this need to have a response to that this is real, because it is real. It's a real dynamic that those mothers are real mothers, the first mothers. And so it's an unintentional, I think when it's not acknowledged, it can be an unintentional way of gaslighting. And I love that there's that word now to make sense of so many dynamics for us now. But I think it's just natural that we're going to have really big feelings of loss, and the need to remind ourselves and those around us that the person we had bonded with for 9 months, at least, sometimes in other cases more, is indeed real. So it's that both mothers are real. And I think it can be, a little bit of a sticking point for parents, that if they feel the need to keep defending that they're the real mother, then it can lead to the child, almost to a point of obsession, needing to protect that realness. And, it can turn it into a competition when it doesn't need to be. Having two mothers should be a recognized and important part of the adoptee's story.
Yeah, and from the adoptive parents' side, it does take a certain amount of healing and strength to be able to withstand being told or hearing, not being told, but hearing that you're not real, or that you're less than, because that's sometimes the translation that happens in our brains when we hear that, when maybe that's not what was meant. You're just looking for validity, and the opportunity to claim and be claimed by both of your mothers, both of your fathers.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
doesn't diminish one.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah.
You shared on my blog in a guest post one time a brilliant reframing, and I'm going to read you this quote. You said, "I wish my mother had paused to realize the inherent compliment I was giving her when I mentioned finding my real mom. I felt safe enough with her to lash out in anger, but more importantly, secure enough in her love to reveal my inner deep, usually very private feelings. The person closest to me was my adoptive mom, after all, and I relished sharing myself with her. My deepest yearning was for my adoptive mother to know and love me, all of me. So there's a couple things in there. One, that it was a compliment, that you were willing to be vulnerable with her and show her your true feelings in that moment that came from a maybe even subconscious place. And then the second one is that you wanted her to love the both and of you, all of you. So
Yeah.
can you what do you think adoptive parents can take from this?
I think I think the biggest thing is just that reminder not to take your child's feelings personally. It's not about the feelings, the emotions are not about you. And again, I mean, back to just especially adolescence when a lot of this starts to bubble up, I think, just remembering it's normal developmental adolescence in some way too. But with adoptees, this is what kind of tends to come up. So, I think stepping outside of ourselves and seeing our children for who they are, seeing the immense grief and the frustration that's behind the attacking energy is an opportunity for the relationship to progress to a deeper level. They're not going to, they're likely not going to admit that it's grief if you call it out right then. Especially in the heat of the moment, adoptees or any adolescents don't want to admit you're
That's way vulnerable.
right. Yeah. But I think just the fact that even if you know that, and it's what you see, it will reframe your perception and I think influence the way that you react. So I think being able to see that will really go a long way in not taking it personally, because all adolescents are filled to the rim with emotion, and especially adoptees, and they don't always make sense to the children and adoptees who are spewing those emotions out. I think for adoptees, we have some very deep wounds, and it takes time to get to a place where both the cognitive and the emotional integration can come about. And it's not all at once. And I don't think it's possible until reaching the maturity on the other side of adolescence. And again, like I said, I had an extended adolescence. So, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who you mentioned, a child developmental psychologist, he often says we all grow older, but not everyone grows up. We see that everywhere in culture.
He said,
we all know people grow older and
you
have
cut out, so let me rephrase. You said, we all grow older, but not everyone grows up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we all age, but not everyone grows up. And we know that. I mean, we see that everywhere, in and out of adoption. But I think, heavy emotions have to go somewhere. And if we're doing our job as parents, raising our children to be functioning members of society on the other side of maturity, it's our job to just drain that well and be a safe place to drain the well. And be the place where the kids aren't going to be expelled or bullied or teased or fired. The person who can see past that attacking energy and help nurture the tears, because that's where the adaptation and growth comes, and the softness and the balm to that attacking energy. And ultimately, that's how we become the place where our children and our adoptees know that they're loved no matter what, that we're not going to be ruffled, and we're not going to be hurt or go away, which of course feeds into our story, that our love is solid, can be trusted, the connection can't be broken, no matter what.
And that's kind of a tall order for parents, but it's also required to be that refuge, even when you feel like you're under attack.
Yeah.
And your advice to not take all of that personal is so helpful. You once said, I love bringing up your own words to you. You once said that adoption is much more complex and nuanced than we have been led to believe by viral YouTube videos and messaging from adoption agencies or the church. What do you mean by that? And what do adoptive parents need to do in response to the complexity that exists?
Yes, I'm so appreciative that you asked that, Lori, and I'm so appreciative for just all the ways that you are open to hearing from adoptees. And this is one that can be a trouble spot, I think, for sure, I think. And so I say what I'm about to say, I just want to preface by just saying, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to speak honestly and hope that it can land and that it's not offensive in any way.
Okay, so everybody listening, take a deep breath so we can hear.
There we
Be
go.
expansive.
I think, for decades, adoptive parents have been leading the conversation on adoption. And not to say that adoptive parents can't have a voice, but it has been at the silencing of adoptees. And I think it has been detrimental to the adoption and relationships and to authentic relationships. The messaging is one-sided. It's not always well thought through on how it will land. And, it can be presented as a very saccharine, sweet story.
Without much complexity at all.
There's the YouTube. Yeah. There was one last fall that was widely shared of a very young girl parroting her adoption story to her gushing mother. And it went viral, and I was seeing it in many different spaces. It was jarring because I'm seeing it in, non-adopted spaces where people love that. Society eats it up. It's so cute. Little kids are adorable. And when they're telling cute stories, it's super cute. And it's, but it was in the adoption community, it's getting spread around with it different because this child, we all know that's been trained into her, and not knowingly, not on purpose, but like hearing only the adoptive parent's side of the joyous story and then the child parroting it back. It's this child trying to be good for her mom and win that love. And it's heartbreaking when it's like looking in a mirror at yourself when you see that happening. And it's very heartbreaking and hurtful to adoptees to see that. And then worrying about, you can't help but want to wrap this little girl up and like talk directly to that mom, like, please don't put that pressure on. And that's not to say she can't know her story, but there room there for more. And just how is she going to find herself later down the road? And also there's privacy issues on that too. I think putting any child's adoption story out there online, adoption and our perception changes as we grow. And so, we just don't know where it's going to go later. And so we've got to be really careful early on, at any point of the journey, of how much we're sharing of that story. And frankly, there's a lot of messaging around adoption that can be very hurtful. And it's really hard to recognize once it becomes so widely used. And I think, I was thinking about this last night, even just some of the vernacular of phrases like killing two birds with one stone or don't beat a dead horse. Those are phrases a lot of us say all the time, and without thought. We're not thinking of actually killing birds or horses, but it's just become part of common kind of vernacular. And I think in the adoption space, there's a lot of that too. There's words such as forever home and gotcha day that are insensitive from adoptees and birth family perspectives. Those kinds of words, present adoption as if it's a light and breezy thing, and center adoptive parents as victors over others' oppression and pain. And so that's just not, that can be hurtful. And so that's part of that. A lot of the messaging is about how much love your birth mother had for you, that she found this other family for you. That's very common. It was common when in my era, and it still reigns a lot today. And it's confusing.
She loved you so much, she gave you away.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that's carried over into my marriage as an adult. Means leaving. That's how it lands. Like, love means leaving. And so, my poor husband, I'm constantly looking for the exit doors. It's really hard to be like serious about love. From the adoptee point of view, if we really pause to consider an adoptee's, voices were more out there, then we would be a little bit more careful about ramifications. I know we don't want for our children. Nobody wants to, help to have a hand in that. Another one, this was just said to me the other day, so this is fresh. I had someone say to me, adoption is the most noble thing a parent can do. and so it's that presentation of the adoptive parents as saviors, and saving this child from doom and gloom, whatever the other situation was. And certainly sometimes that is the case for sure. But it's also presenting it as one-sided. If it were 100% about the child, then family preservation and socioeconomic programs to support struggling mothers would be a higher priority as well. So it doesn't mean that adoption doesn't save children, but it just means that we have to remember not to water down that mainstream messaging so much, where it makes it seem so simple and straightforward, because there are benefits all the way around. And yeah, I guess a theme of our conversation, the both and.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then, back to the church. I mean, the church, I grew up in the church. And so I heard a lot of talk about how adoption and my adoption was God's will, and how I was God's gift to my family. And these are things that I know are true for the parent's perspective. And I believe, with my faith, I have come to believe, I think, God has been taking care of me all along. But I think being overly effusive about God's divine plans when it comes to adoption just, again, discounts the loss and the first family struggles. It just, without meaning to, it sends a message about that first family that isn't honoring to the first family. And by not honoring that first family, it can create that divide, because the adoptee feels stuck in the middle. So, I think it also unknowingly sends the message that God is all about our adoptive parents. And it reinforces that belief that we just kind of tend to have as adoptees, that we don't matter. And it can silence us and alienate us from the God that in faith-based families, that those families are wanting to point the children to. So it's, just with caution. And yeah, I apologize if I'm rambling now.
No, it's super helpful to understand from your perspective that some of the things that make us feel good for saving or rescuing, when in some ways I was saved, that creates a dynamic of discounting the birth family. And when you discount the birth family, you're discounting a large part of the adopted person, because they are of the birth family. So there's so much more behind the platitudes that we see on those YouTube videos, viral ones, and what we see on adoption agency sites, and what we see, what we hear from the church. Then there's a lot more behind it that needs to be thought about before we start perpetuating the simple stances. There's a lot behind it. I always ask my guests to boil down the best piece of advice that you have for adoptive parents about the long view. So what is yours?
I would say, again, it's the theme. I would say, do your best to get comfortable with the complexity of adoption. I think the more comfortable we can all be in that, the less likely we're going to be to simplify the story, to take the dynamics personally. And the more likely we're going to be to really see our children, the full children, and convey that everything inside them is welcome, that there's room for all of it. It's a no strings attached kind of love. And just reinforcing that no matter what, you're never going away. And that's just opening the door for trust and authenticity. I think, I would also say, just play a listening role like you're doing right now. If you're still listening here, and like Lori, you're doing, listen to adult adoptee voices. And we're not always easy to hear. And, I will speak for myself and others. Sometimes there's still some anger under there and some of that attacking energy. And so, I think before discounting it, just keep listening to lots of different sources, and it'll be easy to sort out what is and isn't relevant. I think often we tend to be discounted if the specifics of our adoption aren't the same, or, any number of reasons to discount, oh, that's not the case for me. But just if you keep listening over time, what should be relevant and what could be relevant later will bubble to the surface. So, every story is different. And so I think just, hang in there. hang in there. And I think, I will say my mom and I mean, the full story, Lori, through the book, but um, I will say my mom and I, we got there. We got to a place of really deep love and connection, but it did take a long time, and it makes me really sad how long it took. It didn't happen until my mom was dying, that I was able to fully trust that she loved the whole me. And I never even really fully tested that until she was dying. And that just makes me sad. And so I do have a strong wish for more authentic relationships. So I say, just, there's always hope. Persevere, keep the faith, keep going. And I do believe it can get there, and I really hope it does.
Mm. I'm watching you being privy to the story of you and your adoptive mother, and the healing that happened with all of that was just wonderful. I so enjoyed reading that. So we are going to put show notes, information about how to reach Sara into the show notes. You can find her at saraeasterly.com. Sara does not have an H on it. And we'll have a link to her book. And Sara, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your heart today and helping all of us better understand your experience and what adoption feels like from your perspective.
Lori, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing through this show. I'm just so excited about it and honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
I think my biggest talent is finding fantastic guests. So thanks all of you for joining us. With each episode of Adoption, the Long View, we bring you guests that will expand your knowledge of adoptive parenting. Please subscribe, give this episode a rating, and share with others who are on the journey of adoptive parenting. Thanks to each of you listeners for tuning in and investing in your adoption's long view. May you meet everything on your road ahead with confidence, capability, and compassion.